I was leaving church about a month ago when one of the kids stopped me. Just a side note, this particular kid is about 80% sass. So with one hand on her popped out hip, I need to talk to you. This child is 9 and tiny, and I still felt like I was going to get in trouble. So staring at me, silently, wanting to know what I'd done wrong, I kind of asked, is there anything in particular you would like to talk to me about? It's homework. I need to talk to somebody that I don't normally talk to. So with relief that I wasn't about to get into trouble, she asked me, so, what's interesting about you? Knowing some of her interests and hobbies, I told her about my similar interests in swimming, in dancing, in playing sport, spending time with my friends. I even told her about some of the child-related aspects of my work. And while she was interested in finding out if I actually liked kids, well, none of that's really interesting. What's interesting about you? Now I was a little stumped. What is interesting about me? I didn't know how to answer her. Generally, I would say I'm pretty good at talking to people. At the beginning of the year, I spent 2.5 months traveling around South America, and by the end of that trip, I was great at holding random conversations with complete strangers, to the point that I managed to hold a 10-minute conversation with the men in the park and a 20-minute conversation with a completely random university student who just wanted to practice his English. And now I was being challenged by a 9-year-old. What was interesting about me? There's a poem by Margaret Wheatley called Turning to One Another. She believes we could change the world if we start really listening to each other. She wrote, "You don't fear people whose story you know. Real listening always brings people together." How true is this statement? This was perhaps the real purpose behind that homework task, to talk to someone and get to know them a little bit better. But sometimes we're not very good at that process of starting a conversation and really listening to each other. So often, our own fears, insecurities, and prejudices get in the way of that. Oh wait, perhaps I should have started with some introductions. Hasn't that kind of been the focus of today? Getting to know each other a little bit better? I'm Cassandra. I'm the youngest of 2 children, and I grew up in a suburb of Sydney, Australia. My mother says how they had always originally wanted 3 children, and after having me, it became very clear that 1, I was not cut out to be a middle child, and 2, they could not have handled a child if it had a similar genetic or temperament to me, and I could not agree with them more. As well as being an uncontrollable ball of energy, I could throw the most epic tantrums. My parents tell a story of us going for a walk down the beach and me not wanting to actually walk, but be carried. They refused to carry me, and the tantrum that followed resulted in them dragging my limp body down the rest of the beach. I'd had such a large tantrum that I'd actually caused myself to get so worked up that I passed out. And sticking with their parenting rules, conscious or not, they were not going to carry me. And yet, that isn't the biggest tantrum that I remember throwing. That occurred when my mother did the unthinkable. She invited one of my friends to church camp. Inviting people to things was a part of our life, and I honestly couldn't tell you who started it, if it was me or my mother. All I know is that for as long as I had attended camp, I'd done so with a group of my school friends. Although that one year, my mother did the unthinkable. She invited one particular girl from school, and I had the biggest tantrum of my life. Now, that might not sound tantrum-worthy to any of you well-adjusted people, especially considering so many of my other friends were already attending church camp. But this was different. Whilst we were in the same group of friends, I want it to be clear, she was not my friend. I felt she was often mean to me. She would say there were certain days when I couldn't play with some of our friends. And it wasn't only at school. We did all of the same extracurricular activities together. I did swimming, she did swimming. I did singing lessons, she did swimming lessons. I did dance class, she did dance class. I played netball, a Commonwealth sport that I'll happily tell you about at any other time, and she played netball. She was even friends with my sister. But to make it all even worse, as far as I was concerned, she did all of these things better than me. And now, my mother, my very own mother, had gone and betrayed me. She had invited her to the one place that I had left. She had invited this girl, into the one space she hadn't yet taken over, church. It was my space, and there was no question in my mind that if she was to join that space, she would make a better Christian than me. Hence, the tantrum that rivaled all tantrums. And just like that day on the beach, where my parents dragged my body along, my tantrum didn't work that time either. So she came to camp, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Thinking back, I don't really know when it was that I stopped disliking her. It just sort of happened. I can look back with my adult brain and understand that 90% of my disliking of her, of Sally, came from jealousy and of not really knowing her or anything that was going on in her life other than how it affected me. I was so engulfed in my own concerns and insecurities that I didn't want to get to know her. This church, the community of Christ, was my safe place where I could feel loved and accepted, and it became Sally's too. And you know what? I became okay with that. We're all invited to be part of it. We're all invited by Jesus to be part of a new creation. Perhaps this acceptance and inclusion was part of my transformation and growth. I needed to begin to understand what it really means and looks like to be a part of an authentic, loving community. For me, this meant trying to let go of my own agendas and insecurities. I also needed to fully comprehend that there's others longing to be invited into spaces of authenticity and love, where they can live out that true expression of who God created them to be, and be loved and celebrated in that uniqueness. With these understandings, I can try to create such spaces wherever I am. Margaret Wheatley believed that you could change the world if you only started to really listen to each other. This world changing would not occur in a gigantic, sweeping moment, but simply one person at a time, with you, or even you. In my conversation with that 9-year-old, I had told her a bunch of things that we had in common, thinking that this would be what interested her. In the end, the thing she found most interesting was something that made me very different from her. It's our differences that make us interesting. And it is learning about each other and respecting these differences that we can change the world. Start the conversation. Talk to somebody that you don't know very well and find out what makes that person interesting. Because we all have something, whether we believe it about ourselves or not. We all have something. And in discovering what makes someone unique and interesting, may you also be brave and open-minded enough to invite others into loving community, where together we can change the world.